Hello there, welcome to the Saroy channel, wherever you are in the world, and so much love to each and every one of you. How are you doing? I do hope you're doing remarkably well. I'm doing great, thank you very much, and I'm so delighted you've joined me for part 2 of our story tonight. But before we get on with the story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, click the notification bell and the thumbs up. And I've got a feeling that this story is going to be centred around a little boy called Harry, whose mother has just picked him up from nursery school. So let's continue with our story. I hasten to say, I probably did leave the Peter Pan nursery school with a rather expanded ego. Everybody loves to hear teachers singing their own children's praises, and I was no exception to that rule. I'm sure Mrs. Hancock told everybody their children were wonderful, but I wanted to believe that she thought Harry was extra special, and she had said almost as much. Forgive me if I wanted to bask in the glory of her compliments like a walrus on a sandy beach, sinking back to enjoy the sunshine on his back. But I couldn't help myself. I was doing just that. I took Harry's little hand in mine, and we walked back from the nursery school together, with a skip in our steps. I took one glance up at the sky and groaned. The sky seemed to have forgotten it was supposed to be summer. Dark clouds loomed thunderously across the blue expanse, almost as if they were conspiring against me. It looked more like early evening than late afternoon, as everything became so much darker. I could hear a low grumble as thunder rolled in the distance, and I inwardly winced as I could sense that rain was about to come. I could feel its promise in the air, and then I felt a few little drops squirt out of the sky. Would I make it home in time, I wondered, without getting soaking wet? Could the sky just hold back its tears for a moment longer? "Mummy, I think it's going to pour with rain," said Harry, looking up at the sky and expressing my very worst fears. Don't get me wrong, I enjoy rain, but being stuck in the midst of it is a different story altogether. "That's what we need to do. Walk back home as fast as we can. Do you think you can increase your pace?" I asked Harry encouragingly. "I think I can walk a bit faster, Mummy. Mummy, I feel a couple of drops on my cheeks. It's definitely raining now," said Harry, staring up at the sky. He opened up his mouth, holding back his neck, to catch a few raindrops on his tongue. I was now silently cursing myself for my insouciance. I had snorted indignantly at the weather forecaster's rather beleaguered prognosis for the rest of the afternoon, taking a turn for the worst. I hadn't believed a word of it. The sunshine had been so bright and clear, and it had given me the false, misleading impression that the forecaster was wrong yet again. I knew now, with a few droplets running down my skin, that more rainfall was imminent. The clouds looked as if they were about to burst and unload their sorrowful woes upon us, and I knew that this onslaught of rain would likely be heavy. It was so typical of me to get caught in the rain like this, but there was little I could do to redeem myself, apart from hurry up and get back home as quickly as possible. But little Harry seemed to be caught up in the moment, as if being out in the rain like this was a great big adventure for him, and his childlike inquisitiveness appeared to want to embrace it all. Indeed, Harry's 5-year-old feet appeared to be obstinately dragging along, as if he didn't want to leave the street. He did try to increase his pace, to be fair to him, but would slow down as he stared up at a roof that we passed in the neighbourhood, where a large volume of pigeons began to fly away with a mighty flap of wings, as if they'd been chased off by a large cat. Harry chuckled to himself, pointing up at the pigeons. "They don't want to get wet, do they, Mummy? That's why they're flying away to the trees." "Well, the birds are clever, aren't they? We don't want to get wet either, so we need to walk a little faster, don't we, Harry?" Harry was carrying his painting proudly in his hand. He nodded at me, giving me a big smile. He held my hand tightly in his, and we walked together down the pavement. And then the heavens unapologetically opened. The rain came pelting down in sheets. I began to panic, quickly stepping up my pace and encouraging Harry to do the same. But he wasn't exactly doing very well. "Harry, we need to walk a little bit faster. Do you think you can do it? A little bit faster?" Harry nodded. There was nowhere we could go to shelter to get out of the rain. Even a bus shelter would have been a reassuring welcome for us. But sadly, no such luck. We needed to get home as fast as we possibly could. I was sure by the time we got indoors, the both of us would be so drenched we would be like two drowned rats, having to tear off our clothes to get into warmer garments, leaving puddles of water all over the place. I'd been caught up in the rain before, and ended up with a summer cold days later. I didn't want little Harry to come down with something like that. I was privately cursing myself for not being vigilant enough. Mrs. Hancock had described me as being a great mother. But would a great mother allow her own son to get soaking wet like this? I should have known better. I should have brought along that golfing umbrella with me. It was too late to indulge in the pleasure of hindsight. Me and Harry were now caught in the deluge, and the rain came down furiously fast and hard. I was now flicking back my soaking wet hair from my face, while trails of mascara poured down my cheeks and began to sting my eyes. I was squinting in the rain through narrow slits. My eyes burned with the irritant of my mascara. We stepped up speed, trailing down a slippery pavement, my chin buried in the collar of my dress. It would seem passing cars sent spray over our shoes, their headlights glinting through the darkening day. It really did feel like early evening. Harry was jumping up and down in the puddles of rain, as if it was all a great big exciting game. He stared up at me, with wet eyelashes that formed dark clumps around his eyes. "This is so fun, Mummy! I really love the rain," he said, giggling at the cascades of droplets that clung to his face. My son was now soaked to the skin, and did not appear to mind in the least. From the moment my little Harry got up in the morning, to the very moment he laid down his sweet head on the feather-down pillow for a long night's sleep, he was always a rambunctious ball of energy, and I would never have wanted it any other way. His enthusiasm and zestfulness for life was absolutely infectious, and even now as it bucketed down with rain, he made the whole experience a lot more bearable. He giggled and laughed, kicking the puddles of raindrops that trespassed across our path. "Be careful of your pitcher," I warned him. "Try not to get it wet, Harry." But I could see it looked like it was completely saturated with water. It was folding up in my son's hands, like a curl of chocolate. I could see that the pitcher was clearly ruined. I scrambled awkwardly down the pavement, holding Harry's hand tightly in mine, and moving as quickly as my son's 5-year-old legs would actually allow. We soon passed Curtis Barry's house, and it did cross my mind for a brief second to impose on their hospitality, while the heavy raindrops became more subdued. Thankfully for a moment the rain appeared to ease, although a spirited, rather gusty wind whipped up against our faces. The road had become ominously silent, for we saw no more cars skirting down our street and unapologetically spraying us with yet more water, which in itself was a relief. "Nearly home," I told little Harry encouragingly. But he didn't seem to be bothered about the rain at all, but enjoying it all, as if it was an exciting adventure. But that was the way little Harry viewed the world. Everything was exciting in his callow, naive, wistful eyes. The thought of home only houses away was a seductive, welcome allure for me, and if I had my way, I'd have run home like the wind, but Harry was too heavy for me to carry. The street was so quiet and peaceful at this moment. A gust of wind stole my son's painting from his grasp with a forceful tear, and with a life of its own, like a balloon on the wind, it blew straight into the middle of the tarmac road. In the same breath, my son let go of my hand and ran into the middle of the road to grab his painting. I shouted, "Stop! Come back, Harry! Forget the painting, it's ruined anyway! Leave it, will you?" In that moment I heard the car, before I actually saw it, as its engine roared down the street, its tires moving furiously fast down the tarmac. I'm about to dash after Harry to grab him back to safety, when the unthinkable happens, as the big hulk of metal, belonging to an SUV, comes from nowhere at a speed not acceptable for a day like this, when people should drive with due care and caution. There was an ear-piercing shrill squeal of tires, a dull thud of brakes, the fragile, delicate sound of a 5-year-old body hitting the windscreen as it finally slammed violently onto the tarmac with such a forceful ferocity you'd be hard-pressed to believe that anyone could survive such a gut-clenching impact. My heart thundered against my ribcage. My body took flight like a bird on the wind. I dashed towards my son, unable to feel my legs beneath me. I was believing that I was caught up in a nightmare that just could not be real. A deep guttural wail emerged from inside of me, a sound I've never heard before or since, that I had no idea I was capable of making. I cried out in terror as my primal instinct to protect my son seized me. "No! No! No!" I screamed as I ran towards him. His painting was flying across the road, but my boy was lying in a mangled, crumpled heap before me, his body motionless, his vacant eyes staring up into the blue sky, as if searching for a rainbow. A pool of crimson blood spread out onto the road beneath his head. "No!" I screamed. "No!" I looked up at the blurred windscreen of the driver. The wipers were moving furiously fast, sending arches of water across the glass, and I caught a brief glimpse of her. It was a woman. Her eyes met mine, and I could see fear in their depths as she quickly backed away, swiveling her car, turning it around into the road rather clumsily, and with a mighty jerk she speeded off into the distance until I was left all alone on that tarmac road. I'm crouching beside my son, tears spilling down my cheeks. I'm searching frantically for a pulse that I know I will never find. Please, God, may there be a sign of life. Don't let him die! I'm inwardly crying. Please, God, no! But it's all useless. A blurry figure runs towards me across the road. I recognize the voice as that of my near-death neighbour, Curtis Barry. "My God, what's happened here?" he cried out. He was silent for a brief moment. He stares down at the deceased figure of my son in bewilderment, and then scrambles over to my side to scoop me up into his arms lovingly, offering me kind words of comfort and encouragement that he struggled to find. "It's going to be all right. I promise you it's going to be all right." But when is a hit and run ever going to be all right? I'll never be getting my son back, never. I collapse into Curtis's arms and cry tears that rival the raindrops that are thundering down to the earth. One thing for certain is my life will never ever be the same again. 2 months later, I barely recognize the horrifying gaunt shadow that stares back at me in the mirror. Someone gave me a compliment the other day for looking like a stick-thin figure with anorexic legs like matchsticks. "Oh, you are so lucky to be so terribly thin," I was told. "What I would give to be like you." I winced when she said this to me, for I'd given far too much, and no one would give up this much to be thin. No one in the entire world. Indeed, I'd lost so much weight. My clothes were hanging off me limply like rags. My face was so pale and white, and yes, my under eyes were surrounded with dark half-moons. My brother Marcus had been encouraging me to eat, but I had no interest in food whatsoever, or anything else for that matter, as I guess in my darkest night of the soul, my desire to live had long since been expunged. A light had gone out for me, and all I could think was the relief I would feel to leave behind this world and reunite with my son again. "Sis, you look dreadful," he kept saying to me. "Eat something, for God's sake, just something, before you fade away before my very eyes." I have lied back lamenting on the bunched-up pillows of my solitary king-size bed, feeling desperately alone, forsaken and terribly lost, shedding ubiquitous tears that seemed to have known no end. Indeed, I had cried so much, I simply had no tears left to cry. I had become like a dried-up old riverbed, for nothing wanted to come out of me any more. It was almost as if my body was rebelling against me, refusing to accommodate my grief. How did I go on living in such grievous despair when my son Harry was no more? I would never see his cute little face puckering up into a wide, cheeky grin, nor would he present me with another one of his artworks again, that me and Mrs. Hancock had appreciated so much. My brother Marcus had been desperately kind to me under the circumstances, as dealing with someone in the depths of their despair is never easy. I guess he was at a loss at how best to comfort me, even though he was sharing in my grief, for he had loved Harry very much. He had got Harry's paintings framed for me, so that I would always be able to look at them and remember my son. But how could I ever forget him? He was alive in my heart. People kept reassuring me that with time the dreadful pain would become more bearable, but each day would drag along so warily, almost as if every single second was like a life sentence for me. It was even a challenge just to breathe. If I had my way, I'd have buried myself under my Egyptian cotton sheets and remained there until the end of time. Every morning I was rudely awoken by the sharp pins of the fierce shooting pains of the horror that played out for me on that rainy, inauspicious day that I'd never ever been allowed to forget, as the memory clung to me like a blood-sucking leech. The police had been desperately kind to me, reassuring me that they would catch the negligent hit-and-run driver that ran down my son in the middle of the road. But there had been no breakthroughs in the investigation. There were articles in the Toronto papers, of course, about my son's tragic passing, but no one came forward as a witness concerning the event. Even Eleanor Madison, the biggest busybody living in our street, admitted that at the time of the accident she happened to be enjoying a hot bubble bath in her home, so she could not tell the police anything about the woman that had run my son over. I have no doubt that such an astute woman as herself, had she been around, she'd have been able to give the police the model of the car and the number plate of the vehicle. But sadly, she had chosen a very bad time to enjoy a bubble bath. The radio was ablaze with discussions about the hit-and-run accident, with all kinds of phone-ins. "Well, I blame the mother," came one voice. "I mean, it was bucketing down there with rain, for goodness sake, and she lets her child run into the road like that. She was responsible for the child's behaviour." "Well, I blame the hit-and-run driver. What kind of a person drives off after hitting a 5-year-old child? This person is the lowest form of life, the scum of our society." So you can see, even on local Toronto radio, I was being clandestinely judged as a bad, irresponsible mother for letting my son go into the middle of the road to chase after his painting. But it had happened so quickly, I had no way of stopping it, and since the event, I'm glad to say, a couple of speed bumps had been erected into the road, on the insistence of the local authorities, who said that with the zebra crossing outside the nursery school, it wasn't enough protection for the children, so the entire road needed speed bumps to ensure that people never speeded down it again, unless they wanted to seriously damage their cars. On the side of the road, adjacent to where my son had lost his life so tragically, people like an army of ants had crowded the pavement with teddy bears and flowers to remember little Harry by. Someone had made a big plaque saying, "Harry, rest in peace. You were taken from us far too young, but you will never, ever be forgotten." Never was a truer word ever spoken. Everyone in my neighbourhood had been so kind to me, including my immediate next-door neighbours, the Fenters, who shared the other side of my Victorian home with me. The vegan couple kept dropping over vegetable lasagnas for me, and tomato pastas that my brother Marcus ended up eating instead of me. I wanted to eat, I rarely did, but it was like my jaws were locked together, and my appetite had abandoned me. I would be lucky if I managed a mouthful of pasta, but over the course of the next month, casseroles descended on our doorstep like manna from heaven. The food was so good that in those 6 weeks, it was my brother Marcus who probably gained about 20 pounds. I do remember I talked to the police. When they'd finished their inquiries, I'm sure they must have thought I was a dreadful witness, for I could barely remember anything about the hit-and-run driver, apart from seeing the woman's face, of which I did remember clearly, and a sketch artist was intending to draw it, but when she finished her sketch, it didn't look anything like the woman I remembered. You'd think I'd feel an intense hatred towards the woman that ran over my son, but for reasons I cannot comprehend, I did not. I suppose I did realise it was all a dreadfully unfortunate accident. But, ma'am, do you not remember the make of the car? Or perhaps the colour? That would help us a great deal in our investigation. Do you recall if there was any damage on the car, on the windscreen perhaps? To those questions I had absolutely no answers. I'm sorry, officer. I can't remember very much. It was pouring down with rain. I think the car might have been a dark colour, but I'm not sure. I do remember the driver was female. I remember her face quite well. She looked terribly frightened. I bet she did, grunted the officer. The woman ran over your son and killed him. She should be locked away for good. Shame on her. I can't abide people not taking responsibility for their own actions. She will be arrested, and when she is, she's going to pay for what she's done. I would have given up on myself and my life if it was not for the new addition that arrived so unexpectedly on the scene, like a life-giving breath of fresh air that dabbed the antiseptic of hope on my deep festering internal wounds. This elixir of hope had been scratching on our door at about midnight, on the very day that Harry died. It was the dog I'd considered rescuing and adopting as my own, when I'd passed him, in the rain, while walking to the Peter Pan nursery school. But the dog had been in fear of me, and had run away. But now it was back, seemingly determined to get my attention. Curtis Barry had given me some of his sleeping tablets to take, that the doctor prescribed to him for his insomnia, to help me sleep through the night. But I couldn't sleep as the pain of losing my beloved son Harry had overcome the sedative powers in those pills. I always believed that Harry sent that dog to me after his passing. It was the emaciated dog I'd seen, desperately looking for food in the bin liners that Mr. Booth had tossed outside his front door. It was probably more than his tired legs could bear to make it to the main bin. I had brought the uncertain, disquieted dog into my home, and unlike the first time that I'd seen him, when he'd hurriedly scrambled off in terror to get away from me, this time he began to slowly and surely trust me, as if he suddenly recognized I really was trying to help him, and was investing all my hope in him. In my despair, helping the scraggy skeletal dog make a full recovery, that I decided to call Georgie Boy, helped me to overcome my own personal grief, as my attention was focused on something other than myself, and that really helped me. 2 months later, Georgie Boy was barely recognizable as the same dog. He had grown into a spectacular-looking animal, with a gloriously glossy coat. One thing that remained unchanged was that he was ever so grateful to me for having rescued him. He knew unequivocally that I'd saved his life, so he was so devoted to me. But what Georgie Boy failed to realize, in the same breath, he actually saved my life. I was forever taking him into my arms for a cuddle, and he would cover me with his sloppy kisses, and those were the only moments when my grim, sorrowful face would actually show a smile. When I visited the pet shop in town to get Georgie Boy kitted out with a brand new collar and lead, something peculiar happened. When the pet shop owner herself went to the back of the shop, she said she had to get a designer collar for me that she thought would be absolutely perfect for my dog. I don't know why, she said, shaking her head vigorously. It's come in about, a few days ago, and I haven't unpacked it yet. But for some reason I feel compelled to show you this one. Goodness knows why. The designer who created this particular collar told me that when she was making it, she was inspired by an inner voice that told her to make it exactly like this. To my amazement, the collar was covered with a lady beetle design. I stared at the lady beetle design in stunned awe. I know, said the woman, looking at my shiny eyes. It's lovely, isn't it? I knew you would like it. I do like the lady beetle design. So ingenious, don't you think? For some reason I thought it was perfect for your dog. I could not help shivers from going down my spine, but good ones, because I felt that this was another sign from my son Harry, who loved all lucky symbols. He was telling me he was still very much around. Naturally, I bought the collar at once, and I knew it was from Harry, who I believe had sent Georgie Boy to me in the first place. I would still frequently go into Harry's bedroom to smell his clothes. I wanted to breathe him in. I tried not to think of the moment they lowered his small white casket into the ground. Those are the kind of haunting memories I wanted to blot out, and I still had not visited the tombstone at the local cemetery, where many well-wishers laid flowers and teddy bears at his grave. I wanted to visit him at the cemetery, really I did, but I couldn't bring myself to do it, because my son was lying there, buried 6 feet under. It was too raw for me to do that at this point in time, as it was like admitting to myself that Harry was never ever coming back. The police had not been remotely successful in their inquiries, and of course I cannot remember a thing. I do of course remember a flashback through that windscreen window when I saw that woman's face and the terrified pair of eyes that stared back at me when the woman comprehended exactly what she'd done. By the sound of my son's skull hitting the tarmac, she would almost certainly have known that she had killed him. I remember she'd skirted away in her car as fast as she possibly could. I'm sure by now she knew she had caused my child's death, given it had been all over the Toronto Star and Tribune. I wonder how she can live with herself, given what she's done, I thought. I mean, surely the guilt has got to be eating away at her. As I was meditating over these disquieting thoughts and thinking about the woman that had run over my son, there came a knock at the front door. I reluctantly sashayed over to answer it. I didn't feel like receiving any visitors, but people had been so kind to me in this neighbourhood. It would be rude not to invite them in to enjoy a coffee, although I would rather do nothing but stare blankly into space. Angie Barry was standing in the doorway. She was a very elegant woman, always dressed in vintage-looking clothes that rather reminded me of what women wore in the 1950s. Her auburn curly hair framed her pretty face, as her blue eyes stared at me, with genuine concern in their depths. In her manicured slim hand, she was carrying a steaming pot of food, that when Georgie boy smelt it, he barked appreciatively, with his tail thumping excitedly, as if he was anticipating leftovers. Normally Georgie boy got plenty of leftovers, so he had every right to be optimistic in this regard. Angie Barry is Curtis Barry's wife. He's the one who doesn't know how to stop talking. He owns Lulu the greyhound, and is half deaf, so he wears a hearing aid, and it is rumoured he doesn't know how to turn the thing up. I open the door and Angie Barry elegantly swans right past me, inviting herself into my house, without even being asked. There is a determined look on her face that I've never seen before. I follow her into the kitchen, and the billowing steam that emerges from her casserole smells absolutely delicious. Georgie boy pads by my side. Angie begins to order me around in a loving matriarch manner. "Will you set the table, love? I decided that I'm going to eat with you today. I'm sure you could do with some good company. I hope you don't mind me inviting myself to join you. But you and we've got things to talk about." "We have?" I asked, wondering where this conversation was leading. "Plenty to talk about, love." "But I'm not hungry," I said in protest. Angie smiles at me warmly. "That's a maybe, love. But I assure you, you think you're not hungry, but you will be ravenously hungry once you've tasted my delicious meatloaf. I understand from Curtis that he's been giving you the secret ingredients to all my recipes over the years. Honestly, that husband of mine is the absolute end." Angie rolls her eyes in the back of her head in exasperation. "I mean, secrets are supposed to be kept, are they not? Not my husband, though. He spills them all so shamelessly." "Well, I can't remember any of your secret recipes that he told me," I assured her. "I'm not surprised, love. My husband can get awfully boring when he drones on and on about everything and nothing. I always tell him, 'Curtis, people don't want to listen to you reading the Encyclopedia Britannica to them. They just want light-hearted, happy conversation. But that incorrigible man never listens to a word I say.'" I chuckled. "He doesn't half talk." "You're not kidding. He could talk the hide of an elephant. But I'll tell you one thing. He's right on the money about my meatloaf. I don't normally blow my own trumpet, but when it comes to my meatloaf, I don't believe in being remotely bashful or restrained in my enthusiasm towards it. Wait until you take the first bite. you will see exactly what I'm talking about. My grandmother perfected this recipe. It was passed down our family line for generations. And I'm yet to taste a meatloaf that compares with this one." I smiled at Mrs. Barry's enthusiasm, and I appreciated her efforts to put meat on my bones. But I couldn't remember the last time I'd actually sat down and eaten a half-decent square meal since my son's death, as I'd been nibbling like a little church mouse. I didn't want to be rude to this kind woman, who was going to so much trouble on my behalf. I was touched to the quick by her kindness towards me. Ever since Harry died, the couple had been shopping for me, and Mr. Barry had been maintaining the front yard, refusing to accept any payment for his troubles, and the front yard had never looked more beautiful. He even went to the local nursery to buy some colourful perennials for me, so that I had the showiest displays in the entire neighbourhood, better than his own. I watched as Mrs. Barry put some meatloaf on my plate, along with some mashed potatoes and vegetables. She presented it in front of me and sat down opposite me, with her plate piled high with steaming food. The steam rises above my plate in a large vaporous cloud. The smell is delicious, but I'm still not hungry. "I didn't put a lot on your plate, dear. I don't want to overwhelm you. Are you going to at least have a little bite? I want some feedback on my meatloaf, don't I? I need you to try it." I'm sitting back at the table, wrestling with my knife and fork, and apprehensively taking a tiny nibble of the meatloaf, as if I'm a suspicious kid trying spinach for the very first time, and certain that I'm going to spit it all out. The meatloaf melts into my mouth like butter. It is so tender and moist. The flavours and the full-bodied taste gives me a great deal of pleasure. My whole body groans in appreciation. Without saying a word, I hungrily tuck into Mrs. Barry's meatloaf, as if I'm a half-starved orphan that hasn't eaten for a month. But in a manner of speaking, I probably am. "That is what I like to see, dear," said Mrs. Barry, watching me scrape my plate clean. "I always appreciate it when someone enjoys their food. I thought you said you weren't hungry, but I told you that my meatloaf will always wake up your hunger. Would you like some more, dear?" I nodded and then remembered my manners. "Mrs. Barry, your meatloaf is the best I've ever tasted," and I meant it. "Did I not tell you that this is the world's best meatloaf?" she said, presenting me with another plate of meatloaf and mashed potatoes. And if that was not enough, she placed a strawberry cheesecake she had made herself in front of me, and to my amazement, I gobbled that up, and I felt a whole lot better, as if my entire body, that had been starved for so long, was appreciating the calories it had been denied. "Oh, I am so pleased to see you eat something, love. You've been losing far too much weight. Me and the husband have been so worried about your health. I don't think it's doing you any favours staying around here, reliving your memories. Have you thought of getting away perhaps for a while from this neighbourhood, I mean? It might do you the world of good, you know." "But I can't afford it," I told her honestly. "I mean, of course I've got money in the bank, savings and that, but I haven't been working, so I need to be mindful of everything I spend. Of course Marcus is paying for stuff and that helps a lot, but I don't want to go back to my photography until I'm in a better place. So I just have to be very mindful of everything I spend." "But that's my point, love. You're not eating very much, are you? There's no colour in your cheeks, and there's no life to your energy. You really need to get away. And I've been discussing this matter with Curtis, my husband. We believe we have a sound idea for you that we hope you will accept on our behalves. We happen to have a holiday cabin in Banff, Alberta. Why don't you stay there for a while, as long as you like? I'm sure you've been to Alberta before, so you know it's an idyllic part of the world. The town of Banff, of course, is a tourist's dream. It's like something out of a picture postcard. It's exquisite." "You've got a cabin in Banff?" I asked. "Yes, we have. My husband's parents lived in the cabin for many years, you know. It's well kitted out, exquisite views over the mountains, a very peaceful location. I just think getting away for you would do you the world of good. If you get lonely, you can always go shopping to the local town. There are all kinds of things you can do there. I just believe that being around the natural world is very healing for a ruptured soul like yourself. And given what you've been through, this is exactly what you need. But I can't possibly impose on your kind hospitality, Mrs. Barry. I wouldn't dream of it. You have already done far too much for me. Don't be ridiculous, love. You're not imposing on anyone. The very idea is ridiculous. If you would like a lovely break away from the neighbourhood, it won't cost you a penny, apart from your food costs, of course. But there's a very well-stocked pantry inside the cabin, with long-life stuff you can help yourself to. But as far as fresh produce is concerned, you'll need to go to the local town for that. But I am quite sure the crisp mountain air will do you the world of good and help you to emotionally heal, and we all want to see that happen for you. Georgie boy will be in his element if he goes along with you. You can take him on long leisurely walks in the woodgrove if you like. We can get special permission for you to take Georgie boy with you as a companion for your emotional healing. Failing that, we can make some other plan for you. There are always ways around the system. It will be a lovely escape for the both of you, I'm quite sure. And if you come back with rosy pink in your cheeks, I will be thrilled. Angie Barry took my hand in hers. And as far as the flight is concerned, dear, that's all in apple pie order. We've got that sorted for you, because we would like to give you this trip as a gift from us. I know I can't claim to know what you're going through, love. Losing a child has got to be the worst thing that can possibly happen to anyone. But if I know anything about that little boy of yours, it would absolutely break his heart to see you so broken up. He would want you to recover from everything that's happened. He doesn't want you to be upset. Don't let this tragedy define you. Mrs. Barry took me into her arms and held me tightly. So are you going to take up my offer or not? In the circumstances, I don't think I can possibly refuse. So there we are. That is the end of part 2 of our story. Part 3 is tomorrow night. I look forward to you joining me then. Until next time, goodbye and good night.